The wager. The town of Red Creek was a hard place, baked by the desert sun and ruled by men who measured worth in cattle, land, and how steady their hand was when drawing iron. Among those men, none carried himself with more swagger than Clint Rourke, owner of the Double R Ranch. He had money, muscle, and a reputation for never losing a bet. Folks said he'd gamble on the direction of the wind if someone had the coin to challenge him. That Saturday night, the saloon was alive. Laughter spilled through the doors, the piano rattled out a tune, and cards slapped against wooden tables sticky with spilled whiskey. The air carried the smells of tobacco smoke, sweat, and fried beans. Clint sat in his usual place, back against the wall, hat tilted low, boots stretched out like he owned not only the saloon but the whole town. In truth, he nearly did. A group of cowhands and lesser ranchers crowded his table, eyes glinting with the hunger of men who'd had just enough liquor to loosen their tongues. "Rourke," one of them drawled, a wiry fellow named Sam Dillard, "I reckon there's not a thing in this world you wouldn't wager on." Clint smirked, rolling a cigar between his fingers before striking a match. "Name it, Dillard. If it's worth my time, I'll lay my money down." Dillard grinned mean, showing teeth stained from chew. "What about the widow Carver?" The saloon quieted, as if the desert wind itself had paused to listen. Mary Carver, widowed 2 years, lived on the edge of town in a weathered house with a porch that sagged under its own weight. She wasn't poor exactly. Her late husband had left her a few acres and a mule, but she wasn't wealthy either. What she had was a quiet dignity. She came into town once a week for supplies, always dressed in plain calico, her dark hair braided neat, eyes downcast but sharp. She was a mystery to the men of Red Creek, respected by women, whispered about by men. Clint blew out a lazy stream of smoke. "What about her? You think you can charm her?" Dillard leaned in, his voice taunting. "Lay with her before the month's out? Or are you all hat and no cattle?" A ripple of laughter ran around the table. The idea was wild. Everyone knew Mary Carver wasn't like the saloon girls who smiled for coin. She was a woman of pride, carrying sorrow in her eyes and steel in her spine. Clint narrowed his gaze. His pride flared at the suggestion that there might be something beyond his reach. He never backed down from a challenge, not in cards, cattle drives, or matters of the heart. "How much you putting on it?" Clint asked coolly. Dillard slapped a stack of bills onto the table. $50 says you can't. And if you lose, the whole town'll know you couldn't win over a widow with no man to her name. Clint's jaw tightened. $50 was pocket change to him, but his pride, that was priceless. "You've got yourself a wager," he said, flicking ash into a tin. "But don't say I didn't warn you, Dillard. Some bets ain't good for a man's health." The saloon erupted in hoots and hollers. Word spread faster than prairie fire. Clint Rourke had made a wager to win the widow Carver. The next morning, Clint rode out toward Mary Carver's place, dust rising behind his stallion's hooves. He told himself it was just another game, another chance to prove he was unbeatable. But deep down, a prickle of unease worked at him. Her small homestead sat against the backdrop of red cliffs. The fence needed mending, the barn leaned like a tired old man, yet the place had an air of stubborn endurance. Clint dismounted, tying his reins to the porch rail. Mary stepped out before he could knock. She wore a plain blue dress, apron tied around her waist, a basket of laundry in her arms. Her eyes, gray as a storm, flicked over him without surprise. "Mr. Rourke," she said evenly, "what brings you to my door?" Clint tipped his hat, flashing the smile that had melted more than a few hearts in Red Creek. "Thought I'd see if a lady needed help with chores. A ranch is hard work for one set of hands." Mary set the basket down on the porch rail, straightening. "I've managed fine these 2 years. Don't suppose you came all the way out here to offer kindness without reason." Her words cut sharper than any blade. Clint was taken aback. Most folks bowed to his charm, or at least pretended to. Mary looked him square in the eyes, her expression unreadable. "I reckon neighbors ought to look out for one another," he said smoothly. "Neighbors?" she asked, arching a brow. "Last I checked, the double R was 10 miles north. That's a far ride just to check on me." For a moment, Clint had no answer. He wasn't used to being called on his motives. He shifted his weight, adjusting his hat. "Maybe I wanted company. This land can get lonesome." Mary studied him, then gave a small nod. "Company I can allow. But you'll not find what you came for, Mr. Rourke." The words struck him like a hammer. Did she know about the wager? Impossible. It had only been spoken in the saloon the night before. Still, something in her tone made his chest tighten. She gestured toward the barn. "If you truly want to help, that fence won't mend itself." By noon, Clint's shirt clung with sweat, his hands raw from handling wire and posts. Mary brought out a jug of water, her eyes lingering just long enough to make him wonder if she saw through every layer of his pride. "You're not what I expected," Clint admitted, wiping dust from his brow. "And what did you expect?" she asked, setting the jug down. "A woman broken by loss. Someone waiting for a man to come along and set things right." Mary's eyes hardened, though her voice stayed calm. "I've buried a husband, Mr. Rourke. Grief doesn't make me weak. It made me stronger than most men in this town." Clint fell silent. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. That night, back at the saloon, Dillard and the others pressed him. "Well, did she swoon at your smile?" Dillard jeered. Clint downed a shot of whiskey, his face unreadable. "It ain't over yet." But in truth, something had shifted inside him. Mary Carver was no saloon girl, no easy wager. She carried secrets, that much was clear, and Clint felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. And doubt, for a man like him, was dangerous. The confession. The days that followed weren't kind to Clint Rourke. He tried to brush it off, telling himself Mary Carver was just another wager, another test of his pride. But each time he saddled his horse, his thoughts drifted south toward that weathered homestead. He'd see her face in the dust devils swirling across the range, hear her steady voice in the hush of twilight. By the end of the week, he found himself riding back. Mary was on her porch, mending a shirt by lamplight, when his stallion trotted into her yard. She didn't rise, didn't startle, only looked up and met his eyes as if she'd known he was coming. "You again," she said softly. "Me again," Clint answered, dismounting. "Reckon I owe you supper for the fence work." Mary studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then come in." Inside, her house was plain but tidy, handmade quilts folded neat, shelves lined with jars of preserves, a Bible resting on the mantel. Clint felt a strange discomfort, as though he'd stepped into a place too pure for his boots caked with saloon dust. Mary set a pot of beans and cornbread on the table. They ate in silence, broken only by the creak of the wooden chairs and the faint song of crickets outside. Finally, Clint leaned back, setting down his fork. "Mary, can I ask you something?" "You can ask," she said, not looking up. "Why do you live like this? Alone, carrying so much weight. A woman like you, most men in this town would." "Would what?" she cut in sharply, her eyes flashing. "Would take me for what I own, or for what they think I'll give them. No, thank you, Mr. Rourke." Clint fell silent. He wasn't used to being silenced, yet here he was. Then Mary set her fork down, folded her hands, and took a long breath. "You think this is a game? A wager? I know the talk that passes in that saloon. Don't look so surprised. I hear more than men think." Clint's blood went cold. "You know." Her gray eyes bore into him, steady as the horizon. "I know enough. And before you chase this folly further, you ought to know the truth of me." Clint shifted uneasily. Something in her tone made his chest tighten. "Go on." Mary's voice lowered, heavy as a church bell. "My husband, Daniel Carver, didn't die the way folks think. They say it was a riding accident, that he was thrown from his horse out near the North Ridge." She paused, her hands tightening together. "But that's a lie." Clint frowned. "What are you saying?" Mary's gaze never wavered. "He was shot, Clint. Shot in the back while tending cattle. And the man who pulled the trigger rode under the double R brand." The room seemed to tilt. Clint's mouth went dry. That ain't possible." "It is," she said quietly. "I was there. I heard the shot. By the time I reached him, Daniel was gasping his last breath. He whispered the name." Her voice broke for the first time, though her eyes glistened without tears. "He said it was one of your men." Clint's hands clenched into fists. Rage and disbelief wrestled inside him. "If that's true, why didn't you come to me? Why keep it quiet?" Mary's jaw tightened. "Because what would it matter? You're Clint Rourke, the richest rancher for 50 miles. Who'd take a widow's word over yours? I kept silent because I had no proof but his dying breath. And because revenge, it eats at a soul. I wasn't about to feed it." Her words hit him harder than any bullet. The wager, the pride, the smug arrogance, it all fell hollow. He'd walked into her life thinking himself untouchable, and she just peeled back the truth like a knife to the gut. Clint stood, pacing the small room, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. "Mary, I swear to you, I didn't know. If one of my men, if anyone flying my brand—" He stopped, voice raw. "I'll find out. And I'll make it right." Mary looked at him, weariness etched deep in her face. "And if you do, will it bring Daniel back? Will it give me back the nights I sat waiting for a man who'd never ride home again?" Clint froze. He had no answer. For the first time in his life, wealth and power meant nothing. He was just a man standing in front of a woman he'd wronged without ever laying a hand on her. The following days changed him. Clint returned to the double R with fire in his veins. He called in every foreman, every hand who'd been riding under him 2 years past. He asked questions, demanded answers. Most swore ignorance, but finally, under pressure, one of the older hands broke. It hadn't been ordered. It had been greed. Daniel Carver's herd had strayed close to double R land. One of Clint's men had seen easy profit, taken aim, and silenced the only witness. He'd hidden the truth, hoping no one would ever know. Clint's rage was a storm. He drove the man off his land at gunpoint, swearing the double R would never again harbor the kind of filth that could kill an unarmed neighbor. But the victory felt hollow. Justice, once delayed, tasted bitter. When Clint returned to Mary, he carried no swagger, no gambler's pride. He stood on her porch, hat in hand, a man laid bare. "I found him," he said quietly. "Your husband's killer. He's gone from my ranch forever. If you want more justice, I'll stand beside you when you take it." Mary studied him, her face unreadable. At last, she shook her head. "Justice and vengeance are not the same, Clint Rourke. I've lived with the truth this long. My peace doesn't lie in blood." Clint swallowed hard. "Then what can I do? Tell me, Mary, what can make this right?" Her eyes softened, though sorrow still lingered there. "Nothing can make it right. But you can live different than the man who made that wager. You can be better. For once, not because you want to win, but because it's right." Her words struck deeper than any bullet. That night, Clint rode home under a sky lit with stars. For the first time, The world felt vast, and he felt small. He'd built his life on wagers, on pride, on proving he could win at any cost. But Mary Carver had shown him a truth he couldn't outrun: some losses can never be wagered back. And as the desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust, Clint Rourke knew he was no longer the man he'd been. The wager had ended, but what it left behind was something far greater.